We are going to talk about ecological succession, and there are two types of ecological succession. One is primary and the other is secondary. And basically what ecological succession means is that it's a change in the community. So it's a gradual replacement of one kind of community of organisms by another over time, and it can also be initiated by a disturbance. So let's look at the first type, type 1, which is primary succession. This begins with bare rock. There's basically no soil, and there's no trees, forests, none of that. There's just really nothing there. And we have these organisms called pioneer organisms, which are going to come in and sort of break that rock down. So it's basically slow soil development by weathering activities of tolerant species, and we call them pioneer species. And an example of a pioneer species is a lichen, and lichens are going to basically be, we say pioneer, they're the first species that'll grow onto that rock, and over time, and this could take, again, a long time, it's not anything that happens overnight, that those pioneer species will break down the rock and you will get soil. Type 1 is a gradual changeover to a less tolerant species over long periods of time. You get equilibrium, and you get basically species that are going to be able to survive in that environment, and it'll just be sort of a gradual change over a long period of time. So if we look at primary succession, I always tell students that you can always tell on a test or a quiz that we're talking about succession. If all the way to the left we start with nothing, so just the bare rock and the exposure, then you can see we have the lichens and the moss, and then as we go along, they develop into the small herbs and shrubs, and then we go eventually down and we get to this sort of forest, and we end with what we call this climax community. Secondary succession is the second type of transition that happens in a community, and this is basically when soil is already present, it's already there in place, so we're not making the soil from bare rock, and due to some sort of disturbance, some sort of tragedy, maybe there was a fire, maybe there was an earthquake or a hurricane, something that's going to basically destroy the vegetation that's already there, so they'll destroy the forest, and then it will get replaced over time. Secondary succession is the rapid changeover to a less tolerant species over shorter periods of time, and it's rapid because the soil is already present. So it's not going to take as long as primary succession, because with primary succession you're ending with nothing, or you're starting with nothing, and then you're going to get to that climax community, that forest that you want. With secondary succession, you already had the forest, a fire came and destroyed it, or some sort of tornado or something wiped it out, wiped that whole area out, and now it'll grow back, but it won't take as long. So secondary is much faster. This is secondary succession, where again, we're not starting with the bare rock. So we're starting with some weeds, and then we're going through with shrubs and the trees, and finally getting to our forest. We don't really need to know this slide about wildlife, the organisms that live there, so we're going to skip over that. Our end product, if undisturbed, communities change toward a relatively stable stage, and we call that sort of stable or general equilibrium a climax community. So think of like at the end of a book that you're reading, you get to the sort of climax of it, and you can think of that as the end product. The long-term presence, if not disturbed, it's dominated by less tolerant species, and you get to that general equilibrium. So just to talk it over in summary, succession is the gradual regrowth of a species in an area. There are the two types: primary, in an area that has not previously supported life, so it was bare rock. Secondary follows a disruption of an existing community. So maybe there was a fire, tornado, a flood, etc. Pioneer species are the first species to colonize that new area, that new habitat. They will form right on the bare rock and break it down. And a climax community is the end result of succession, which is going to remain constant over time. You can even sort of think of that as like the biome of the area. So as you can see, we start with nothing, or we start with shrubs, or weeds, I guess I should say, and then we finally get to that forest, that climax community at the end. And that is succession.